Hey guys, welcome back to the Mind of Brandon, and welcome back to another Sunday of Science and Spirituality. As indicated by the title of this video, William Lane Craig's White Knight isn't dead! So I recently uploaded a video called William Lane Craig's Best Arguments for God Debunked. And someone came into the comment section and started leaving little arguments down there. So I responded to his commentary with a video titled Battle with William Lane Craig's White Knight. And he then proceeded to go into the comment section of that video and start leaving more arguments. So today's video is going to be responding to that comment. So here it is.
I'm flattered you took the time to make this response. It was fun to watch. A couple of quick points. You shouldn't base strongly held beliefs on Einstein/Tyson said so. You quoted them like that was supposed to end the debate, just as much as religious people often quote someone or some book, as though that somehow proves something. Appealed authority is a logical fallacy.
Well, you know what else is a logical fallacy? A straw man argument. That is, of course, precisely what you've done here. Because I never said, nor did I even imply, that something's just gotta be true because it was said by Neil deGrasse Tyson or Albert Einstein. Citing your references, saying where you're getting your information from, is not the same thing as saying that information is just gotta be true because some authority said so. It's not some fallacious appeal to authority. The reason I brought up Einstein was to clarify for you where I was getting this concept that energy couldn't be created or destroyed, just changed. I was clarifying for you that I did not get it from some law of thermodynamics. I got it from Einstein. Well, technically I got it more directly from other physicists, but they typically cite Einstein. That being said, after I provided the Einstein quote, did I then follow it up with,
"There you go, guys. That settles it. Einstein said it, so it must be true."
No, I followed it up with this. But maybe you think that even Einstein is misapplying some law of thermodynamics, so let's go ahead and have a look at your reasons for thinking so. Almost as if I was under no delusion or trying to create the illusion that the matter was settled. I even went on to examine the points that you were making and did some extra research to see if you knew what you were talking about, and it turned out that you didn't, so I demonstrated that, and I did it without saying, oh, this disagrees with Einstein, so it must be wrong. So where do you get this notion that I was committing some fallacious appeal to authority? There doesn't seem to actually be any evidence for that. And of course, the reason I brought up Neil deGrasse Tyson is because you seem to be under the impression that when Bill Craig said that the initial conditions of the universe were finely tuned for intelligent life, that was standard cosmology. So it occurred to me that if it's true that this concept that the initial conditions of the universe were finely tuned for intelligent life is standard cosmology, then it should be pretty standard that a professor of cosmology, like the renowned astrophysicist Neil deGrasse fucking Tyson, should probably say when he's talking about the standard cosmological model that the initial conditions of the universe were finely tuned for intelligent life. But of course he does not say that, actually quite the contrary. Now this is not an appeal to authority, it's simply pointing out a lack of evidence to substantiate your claim that this is standard cosmology. In fact, even if you just Google standard cosmology, the first article here says absolutely nothing about the initial conditions of the universe being finely tuned for intelligent life. Neither does the second article. The third article at least mentions fine-tuning of some sort, but it still doesn't say that the initial conditions of the universe were finely tuned for intelligent life, nor does it even imply it. And neither do any of the other options on the screen here. In fact, if you look up fine-tuning on Wikipedia, not only does it not say that it comes from standard cosmology, but it also doesn't say anything about the initial conditions of the universe being finely tuned for intelligent life. So where's the evidence that substantiates your claim that what Bill Craig says about the initial conditions of the universe being finely tuned for intelligent life is standard cosmology? In the words of Victor Stanger, the universe is not fine-tuned to life. Life is fine-tuned to the universe. Referring, of course, to life being adapted to the universe via evolution by natural processes. Yeah, I think you'll find that that's the standard view of non-religious professors who teach about the standard cosmological model.
Appeal to authority is a logical fallacy, as is using common dictionaries to settle deep conceptual issues. Just witness the creationist nuts who think just a theory is a sensible thing to say because of how theory is defined in common dictionaries.
Dude, your problem's not going to go away by cop-out labeling something as a deep conceptual issue and erroneously accusing me of making a fallacious appeal to authority. And for crying out loud, why should it bother me if someone gets their definition for theory from a common use dictionary? There's no reason I should be bothered by that. I mean, if a creationist says that evolution is just a theory, or the Big Bang is just a theory, as if that somehow makes them less valid or less substantiated with evidence or something, then they just haven't been updated to the fact that these theories are actually just as well tested as the classical laws. So we could call them laws, it's just that it's customary to call them theories. It's what we're used to, and it's kind of hard to break the habit. Also, I guess some scientists are just insecure about calling anything a law ever again because of what happened with Newtonian law. Now, this might make some of the audience wonder, well, what happened with Newtonian law, right? Well, Newtonian physics works pretty well here on planet Earth, as well as with most of the other planets in the solar system, so we can use it to accurately predict where a planet will be at a particular time, okay? Where it fails us is with planet Mercury, the planet closest to the sun. In fact, it turns out that's actually precisely why it fails us there, because the sun is such a significant source of gravity that gravity is actually warping the space that Mercury occupies. Now, don't get me wrong, this is something that all the planets are doing. They're all warping the space around them, just not on the same level that the sun is. And this is something Newton just didn't know about. He didn't know that sources of gravity would warp the space-time around them. So that's what was throwing off the math. That's why Newtonian physics is insufficient for accounting for the orbit of planet Mercury. It was Einstein who came along and saved the day on that one. So does that mean that Newtonian physics just doesn't work? We should just throw it out? No. It works pretty well within its own domain. It's just we need to account for the fact that it doesn't really have a complete picture with regard to how this gravity stuff works. And sometimes we just need a new branch of science to layer on top of what we already got. Or perhaps a better way of putting that would be another branch of science within which we can encapsulate what we already got. That being said, I think this is a pretty silly reason not to refer to evolution as law or to the Big Bang as law. Perhaps we should all make an effort to get used to thinking of them as laws instead of as just theories. Don't get me wrong, whether you call it a law or a theory, that's not really important. What's important is what is the actual evidence that is actually available to us.
Whether a concept is a thing is a deep philosophical issue, not something we turn to common usage dictionaries to resolve.
Says you, and how the hell are you supposed to classify a word as representing a deep philosophical concept if you don't first have a definition to go along with that word? I can think of where to find some definitions. Oh, that's right, a fucking common usage dictionary. But the reason I was even looking at a dictionary is because you were quibbling over semantics. You made an unjustified semantical argument that I demonstrated was unjustified by going to a dictionary and revealing the evidence that an abstract concept is actually commonly accepted as an example of a thing. Now, that's not to imply that common acceptance is what makes something right. When it comes to words and how to define them, there's no such thing as right or wrong. There's no such thing as a right or wrong way to define a word. Okay, there's an originally intended way of defining a word, but that's subject to interpretation, and it leads to a bunch of different definitions. The word ends up being used differently in different contexts, and there doesn't seem to be anything we can do to avoid it. So the way spoken language actually works is that if two different people use the same word, the same way, then they'll understand each other. If, however, they use it in two different ways, then they might have a misunderstanding. So if your attitude is that there's a particular way to use the word thing that is the right way, and we must never stray from that definition, God damn it! If that's your attitude, then what is the evidence that substantiates your position that that's the right way to use that word?
But in any case, it's sufficient to say that concepts are not contingent objects, so they are irrelevant to the contingency argument.
Your point is irrelevant. Look, Bill Craig's contingency argument is neglecting to account for the fact that energy is the most fundamental stuff that we know of, okay? The elementary particles are made of energy. Space-time itself is made of energy. The forces, whether it's the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, gravity, electromagnetism, it's all made of energy, okay? For anything to move requires energy. This is all energy, okay? And energy, as far as we can tell, based on what evidence is available to us, cannot be created or destroyed, just changed. So how does it logically follow that God is the best explanation there is for why there's something instead of nothing? Oh, that's right, it doesn't logically follow at all. We don't need God. We've got energy. We know for a fact energy is what's producing the elementary particles that make up the subatomic particles, that make up the atoms, that make up the molecules, that make up the compounds of matter, that make up the stars and planets and asteroids and comets and galaxies and universes and multiverses. Why do we need a fucking God? It makes no goddamn sense! So the point is, since we know that energy is what's generating these elementary particles that make up the subatomic particles, that make up the atoms, etc., since we know it's energy that's behind that, that demonstrates it's not God that's behind it, okay? If energy is what's doing it, that means it's not God. Unless, there is an exception here. The exception is if God is energy, or energy is God, however you want to phrase it, okay? If God and energy are the same thing, or the same stuff, however you want to phrase it. Okay, that's the situation where you could still say, oh yeah, God's responsible. If you're gonna deify energy. Now, me personally, I'm not gonna go around calling energy God unless it starts performing miraculous acts to make my life better. Or at the very least, it needs to show evidence that it's a sentient being. Like that point in space right there needs to display some semblance of sentience, or something like that.
You didn't give any reason to think energy can't be created or destroyed, except that Einstein said so.
Well, there's no evidence that energy can be created or destroyed. If you feel differently, then feel free to explain what that evidence is. You're gonna have to do better than to say that everyone's just misinterpreting some law of thermodynamics, which is not really how it works. I mean, you know, thermodynamics is based on experiments, so we'd, you know, interpret the results of those experiments before writing out the law, so it doesn't really, your argument doesn't really work.
There's no apparent logical contradiction in the statement, energy can be created or destroyed. So why do you say with such certainty that it can't? Conservation of energy, as you mentioned, is just referring to constancy of the amount of energy in an isolated/closed system. So the law doesn't show that energy can't be created or destroyed. What in your mind proves that it can't?
Well, for starters, like we already established, energy is the most fundamental stuff that we're aware of. You know, that's what all the matter is made of. It's what all the forces are made out of. It's what space-time itself is made out of, right? If you have like a vacuum chamber, you try to suck out all the matter and energy, you can get a lot of energy out of it, but you can't get all the energy out. It's, you know, it's my understanding that, you know, typically in a vacuum chamber, there's going to be enough energy to actually generate elementary particles. So yeah, if energy is literally the most fundamental stuff that exists, then there's not really other stuff that you can make it out of. You see the issue there? How can you create energy if there's not really something else to make it out of? Kind of an issue there, right? That being said, if we ever discovered the ability to destroy energy, well, it seems that that would also simultaneously be the ability to destroy everything in existence. Because everything's fundamentally energy. Right? So if we figured out how to destroy energy, that would be like the most destructive power ever. I don't know if that's possible. I doubt it. I certainly hope it's not possible. Right? That's some scary shit. I guess there's part of me that thinks if it was possible to destroy everything in existence, that it would have happened by now. If we factor in all the other possible universes that might exist, all the possible multiverses or whatever, right? It just kind of seems like it would have happened by now if it was going to happen. So it's just like, yeah, I can't really take that idea too seriously. Suffice it to say, we never really ever see energy created or destroyed. We don't really have a good reason to think it can be created or destroyed, and we seem to have good reason to think that it can't be.
The Bible doesn't actually say God spoke the world into being.
It's kind of subject to interpretation. I mean, he's definitely using spoken command to gather the waters together into one place so that dry land can appear. And of course, the dry land is what he calls earth. So it does seem he's using spoken command to bring the earth about. But at the same time, like the way it reads, it's like, does he actually create the land, or does he just make it emerge from the waters? Because it doesn't actually say he creates it unless you count the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. But like when you look at the way that he went about it, it looks more like it's just kind of emerging from the primordial waters. It's kind of subject to interpretation. I mean, the first verse does say he created it, but that could just be a contradiction. Bible does have those, so it's not really clear what's going on with that.
It says he spoke, and changes occurred in an already existing universe.
Well, again, I think that's kind of subject to interpretation. I mean, do you consider the uncreated primordial waters to be like the universe? I'm not saying there's something wrong with that. It kind of depends on what do you regard as a universe, right? I mean, the word universe is itself pretty subject to interpretation. That's why we have different conceptions of our universe. Do we have an expanding universe, or is it a universe that represents the totality of all that exists? I know that some people conflate the two. They think that the expanding universe is the totality universe, but that's actually a contradiction. I mean, if we're talking about totality doesn't really have anywhere that it can go. All places to go are already accounted for in totality. Whereas a universe that exists inside of totality has space into which it can move. That being said, I don't think I ever said that God spoke the universe into existence, or that it spoke the world into existence. I guess it's possible I used those words. I'm not going to go back and check. I think what I said, well, I know for a fact that at some point I said that his method of creation is he speaks things into existence, at least in Genesis chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 2, he's definitely like fashioning things from pre-existing materials. He forms man from the dust of the ground, fashions woman from a rib in the man's side. But in the first chapter, his method of creation is spoken command. He speaks things into existence. I mean, not everything that gets created in the first chapter is directly a result of God saying let it be. I mean, it's the waters that produce the animals that fly in the sky, as well as the animals that swim in the sea. It's the land that produces the vegetation and the animals of the land. It's still due to God's spoken command. He's like, let this happen, let that happen. But he does get help from the earth and from the water. That is, it's more directly the earth and the waters that produce those things. But yeah, the only things that I recall God speaking directly into existence were light, the firmament, and the lights in the firmament, right? The stars and the sun and moon, right? Apparently the moon's a light.
even then, it isn't the power of his voice, it's his spirit, or power/energy in action, which produces these changes.
Well, it doesn't actually explicitly say that it was the spirit that was used to bring those things into existence, but I think you're actually onto something with that. That doesn't mean that it was a spirit instead of the voice of God. This might actually be one of those potato arguments because this is actually something I talked about in a video I did called Genesis 1:3, Let There Be Light. Basically, the Hebrew word that's being translated there as spirit, it's the word ruach, which is also commonly translated as air, wind, or breath. So we could actually see it as the breath of God moving over the waters. That would make perfect sense since the very next thing that happens is that God speaks. He says, let there be light, and then there's light.
As to the universe's existence, it just says God created it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. No voice powers appealed to there.
Well, the first verse is probably actually just a summary of what's to come. I mean, if you see it as like the initial act of creation, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. That's it. Heaven and earth are already created. And then, and then you get what happens in the second verse, and then the next thing happens, and then the next. If that's how you look at it, then God actually creates heaven twice in this story. He creates it in the first verse, and then again on the second day when he creates the firmament and calls it heaven. Okay, so it's possible. Like I said, contradictions happen in the Bible. I don't think this is one of them, though. I think that this is, well, like I say, I think the first verse is just kind of summarizing what's to come. It's kind of saying what this story is about. It's about in the beginning when God created the heaven and the earth, and then the second verse establishes what conditions were like when God created the heaven and the earth. And then it's after that you get the step-by-step creation process.
The Big Bang doesn't explain why there's a physical world. It just explains a change from one state to another.
Well, to clarify, I never said that the Big Bang was responsible for our physical world. I said that the Big Bang explains the expanding universe, but that energy is where we get matter, like the matter that goes into making a world, for example.
But what caused the Big Bang, and what made the stuff that banged in the first place?
Dude, I already answered this question in at least one of the videos you commented on. Okay, so the Big Bang Theory was originally called the hypothesis of the primeval atom because it was hypothesized that there was some kind of atom or particle that exploded, and that's what set in motion the formation of the universe. Now, if it's true that it was an atom, it might not have been. It might have been like a dark matter particle, something like that. Maybe some kind of extra-dimensional particle that we've never heard of. But if it was actually an atom, well, what's an atom made out of? Subatomic particles like protons and neutrons. What are those made out of? Elementary particles like quarks and gluons. What are those made out of? Those are made out of energy, which, so far as we can tell, based on what evidence is available to us, cannot be created or destroyed, just changed. And if that's true, well, it seems that energy's just always existed. Right? So, that's the answer to your question. I just answered what it was that banged. Technically, there wasn't actually a bang because sound doesn't travel through a vacuum, but what it was that exploded. Okay, I answered that. Okay, and I answered what went into that. Okay, I explained to you what an atom is made out of. I explained to you what that was made out of fundamentally. Okay, so I've answered the question. Don't ask it again.
For the record, if you say that eternally existing energy just happened to change state a finite time ago, you have a very serious problem. For any non-personal set of physical conditions, if it is sufficient to produce an effect, then it will necessarily do so. So if the energy existed trillions of years ago and is sufficient to produce the world, why didn't it do so trillions of years ago? Only persons can be totally sufficient to produce effects, and yet only actually get around to doing so at a time of their choosing. To borrow an analogy from William Craig, if a bowl of water has always been at sub-zero temperatures, then the water would always be frozen. It wouldn't just freeze some finite time ago.
Well, to clarify, I am not saying that eternally existing energy fully sufficient to produce our world just happened to change state a finite time ago. That's not really how I look at it. I mean, you got to keep in mind that our universe probably exists in a multiverse that was already producing universes before ours came along. And I fully expect that the multiverse works somewhat similar to how our universe does. It would have to be different, I suspect. Not quite the same. But we could certainly expect that there still be energy at every single little point in space. Vibrating differently, taking different manifestations. So there'd still be negatively charged particles, positively charged particles, neutrally charged particles, right? And just like we see in our universe, where there's different types of particles associated with different energy regimes, we could probably expect that in a multiverse as well. And of course, we got to keep in mind that time is relative, and you can perhaps perceive there being a different space-time associated with every single little point in space. So when we consider the energy of the overarching omniverse, when we think outside of all the universes and multiverses, etc., I don't really perceive that to be like a single consistent type of energy. No, it's energy in flux. Okay, so like what the energy is like over here, it's not necessarily the same here, there, whatever, right? Yeah, basically I perceive it as chaos. So any perceived order that exists in our universe is order that has essentially come about out of chaos. Just like a kind of an example of the sort of thing I'm like talking about. This is just like a shoebox with like randomly placed magnets in it. They're of course positively charged on one side, negatively charged on the other. That's kind of like what I'm talking about.
Fine-tuning of certain constants and quantities as initial conditions in a life-permitting universe is indeed standard cosmology. That is not the same as saying it was designed. It just means that if those numbers had been slightly different, there wouldn't be planets or stars, and there certainly wouldn't be any intelligent life forms. Life permitting is all Craig is arguing for. He doesn't say designed for us, and neither did I.
Well, I'm not going to tell you that you didn't mean what you're saying you meant, but it's definitely safe to say that you're misconstruing what Bill Craig meant. I mean, you're acting like he's making a secular statement when he says the initial conditions of the universe are finely tuned for intelligent life, but the title of the video is Best Argument for Belief in God.
A third argument would be the design argument, which holds that God is the best explanation for the remarkable fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe for intelligent life.
Wait a second. Which argument was that again? Which number are we on? Oh yeah, the design argument. Don't tell me he just means life permitting. He literally thinks that the initial conditions of the universe were finely tuned for intelligent life. So even if he didn't use the words designed for us, that's basically what he's saying. He is saying it was designed for us.
As for why is there debris, it's the same answer as before. You need a system that produces debris in order for chunks of debris to coalesce into solar systems and planets in the first place. The natural spin-off of that is the occasional comet or asteroid flying around.
Yeah, what you just described, that's reality. And it's not what we see in the Bible. Where in the Genesis cosmology does God say, let there be chunks of debris flying around to coalesce into stars and planets? Oh, that's right, it doesn't say that. He says, let there be lights in the firmament. And then those lights are, the two great lights to rule the day, one to rule the day, one to rule the night, and the stars. And they are there for signs and seasons and days and years. Doesn't say anything about, let there be planet Jupiter to help protect the Earth from fucking chunks of debris or whatever. Let there be all this debris to do all this. There's none of that shit in there, dude.
You do know you haven't given any argument for moral subjectivism, right? You've just insisted it's true.
You you don't think it's just obvious that people have different moral values, different nations, states, provinces, cities, towns, counties having different laws. Sometimes they conflict with each other. Sometimes people disagree with the laws of their state or whatever. Oh, I think we should legalize that. I think we should ban this. And people argue with each other. That's immoral. No, this is immoral. This is right. This is fine. Right? I mean, there's all these conflicting different moral values all over the place. Obviously, it's all subjective. Okay, that if you have your own moral code and someone else has their own moral code, that's what we call subjective morality. Okay, that it's demonstrably real. We know for a fact that there are subjective moral values. Okay, it's all over the place. I mean, unless you just think everyone's fucking lying and we all agree that there's some objective moral code, which, no, that's insane. There's no good fucking reason to think so. Even if there's a God, okay? Even if there's a God that transcends this universe, predates it, created our universe, okay? If that God has a moral code, that is its moral code. We don't agree with it necessarily. If that God thinks, you know what, those fucking gay people fucking each other in the butt, fuck them, I'm just gonna wipe them all out. Fuck you, gay people, fucking faggots! Right? If that's his moral values, a lot of us are gonna be like, dude, God's a fucking dick!
That being said, you keep speaking as though a world where machines do all the slave labor and humans are equal and well provided for and happy is somehow an improvement over a world with slavery and prejudice.
Yeah, maybe because I'm sick of the current system that we're in where everything that we need costs us money. How do we get that money? By working our fucking asses off. Slaving away, slaving away, slaving away day after day. How is that any way to go through life? Oh, and I do have some semblance of empathy and compassion for others. I'm not completely selfish. I'm actually pretty selfish, but I do have some semblance of empathy and compassion. I really do.
In any case, if you genuinely believe there are no moral truths, then the moral argument won't work on you. I could probably show that denying them leads to radical skepticism about the rest of our cognitive apparatus and whether there really is a world out there or the past is real, etc.
What? Dude, there's absolutely nothing radically skeptic about not believing in something that has evidence against it. Like objective morality? We don't have evidence for it. We've got good reason to think it doesn't exist. Of course there's evidence for a world out there, and of course there's evidence that the past is real. I wouldn't be here if the past wasn't fucking real. Being able to identify what has evidence for it, what doesn't have evidence for it, and what actually has evidence against it is not radical skepticism.
If you want to bite the bullet and deny that there is any moral difference between a society of bigotry and child rape versus a society of equality and kindness, we can just agree to disagree and discuss other arguments.
Well, no, they're morally different in the sense that they operate on two different moral codes, but that doesn't mean that there's such a thing as objective morality. It doesn't mean there's such a thing as morally right and morally wrong, right? One of them, you could argue might have a more practical run society. That's going to be contextual, practical for what? Like if I was ruler of the world, okay, there would be certain ways that would be practical for me to run the world in ways that would work to my benefit, okay? So if I wanted to maximize my benefits from how I run the world, well, one of the things I'm going to have to do is take care of everyone else. If I don't take care of everyone else, I'm fucked. They're going to kill me, right? So, that's something to keep in mind. Best way to make sure I'm safe and secure is to make sure the world is safe and secure, right? Best way to make sure that I stay well fed is to make sure the world stays well fed. Now contrast that with the present system where we pretend that there's such a thing as morally right and morally wrong. If someone like steals something from you, you might feel like, oh, they did something immoral. How fucking dare they, right? And then they go to jail, right? They go through our system of crime and punishment, right? Whereas in my system, the system I'm advocating for, we just give everyone access to the things they need so no one ever fucking steals anything. Which is more practical? Is it more practical to pretend that there's such a thing as wicked, horrible, evil people? Or is it more practical just fucking take care of people?
And finally, necessary in the ontological argument doesn't mean necessary for something. It means non-contingent. It means that the non-existence of the thing would entail a logical contradiction. If something is defined as having this property, and if that something is logically possible, then it actually exists. There's no way around that.
I don't follow you. That was not very coherent, but it sounded like you were basically defending the worst argument for God I've ever fucking heard. Okay, you know what? It's possible that the cat is chilling on the other side of that fucking door right there. Let's just have a look at that. I think it's possible that there's a cat chilling on the other side of the fucking door right there. It's possible. There might be. Let's find out. This might be the worst fucking example. Is there a cat there? Is there a cat there? Oh, nope. Oh, that was a good gamble. There could have been. There's a cat that lives at this house, so there could have been a cat there. But I just demonstrated that the mere possibility of there being a cat there did not magically make it so that there was actually a cat there. So the ontological argument remains the fucking stupidest argument I have ever fucking heard to substantiate the existence of God. The opinion that something is possible doesn't make it fucking real.
So you have to show that God's existence entails a logical contradiction, or else he actually does exist. And you haven't shown that. No one has. The best they've come up with is the argument from evil, and you don't even believe that there are any evils in the world. That's why I said good luck with that.
Okay, if I understand your argument correctly, then you're basically saying that if it's not within my skill set to demonstrate that there's some pink unicorn living on some planet the next solar system over, that means there's a pink unicorn living on some planet the next solar system over. In case you needed to be informed of this, the fact that it's not within my skill set to demonstrate that there's no pink unicorn living on some planet the next solar system over does not fucking mean there's a pink unicorn living on some planet the next solar system over. But we're not talking about a pink unicorn, we're talking about God. Gotta give special treatment to God, right? No, God doesn't get special treatment, okay? Look, there's gonna be plenty of people who are not gonna be, it's not gonna be in their skill set to be able to demonstrate that there's no such thing as God. Now with me, you got lucky because that's my specialty. That's what I do, right? That seems basically to be my career. That's like what I'm best at is debunking God. So one of the things we've of course covered a lot in previous videos is that if it can be demonstrated that this is what's going on, then it can show that this other thing is not what's going on, right? If we can show that, this is what's responsible for creating that, then it means that this other thing is not responsible for creating it, okay? A great example what I'm talking about, the Egyptian falcon god Horus. Okay, there's different ways of perceiving Horus, but one of the ways he was perceived is, he's this falcon god of the sky with the sun and moon as his eyes, okay? Here's the thing. In modernity, we've been sending rockets into space. We've got satellites in orbit. People have landed on the moon. Nothing's crashed in the face of a falcon god, right? I mean, the sun is one of sextillions of stars in the universe. The moon is basically this dust-covered rock, right? The sun and moon are not eyes, and the sky is not a giant falcon. We fucking know this, right? So, the Egyptians were wrong about the falcon sky god Horus. That's demonstrable, okay? And the same can be said of the God of the Bible using the same kind of logic. Okay, we can demonstrate that the God of the Bible isn't real by showing here's what's actually going on. Okay, the book of Exodus, you got Moses and the Israelites on a voyage to Mount Sinai, following a pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night. Once they get to Mount Sinai, it's quaking, smoking, making loud thunderous noises, and then God descends upon it in fire. Gee, that sounds kind of like a fucking volcano! But let's not skip over Genesis. Genesis, of course, says that God created heaven and earth and plants and animals over the course of only 6 days. Then, resting on the seventh, he formed man from the dust of the ground, fashioned woman from a rib in the man's side, and then put them in a garden with a talking snake and mystical trees that grow magical fruits. Now, there's of course no evidence to substantiate any of those claims. There is, however, good evidence to support the Big Bang. There's good evidence to support evolution, right? All of which played out very differently from what we see in the fucking Bible. Some people, of course, like to pretend that the Bible works with Big Bang cosmology and evolution. It really doesn't, okay? The standard cosmological model doesn't say that heaven and earth and plants and animals all came about over the course of 6 fucking days, right? Evolution, of course, doesn't say that man was formed from the dust of the ground, woman fashioned from a rib in the man's side. No, that's not how a fucking evolution works. Plus, let's not forget that the Bible perpetuates the common misconception of a relatively flat, disc-shaped earth circumimposed by the dome of heaven. And they're both just kind of floating in a sea of primordial waters. So yeah, it's really not that hard to make a good case against the God of the Bible. It's not that hard to make a good case against the volcano god that created the flat earth and dome of heaven and plants and animals over the course of 6 days, then resting on the seventh, formed man from the dust of the ground, fashioned woman from a rib in the man's side, and then put them in a garden with a talking snake and mystical trees that grow magical fruits. Not hard at all. In case you missed it, I just debunked the biblical god with the same logic used to debunk the Egyptian falcon god Horus.
Anyway, I'm sorry I don't have the capability of making an entertaining response video like you have done. I hope reading this wasn't too boring.
Yeah, boring's not really how I'd describe it.
And I wish you the best.
Oh yeah, totally. I wish you the best too. Alright guys, that's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and share it with other people. If you're interested in watching my future videos, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next one. So have a good one, guys, and peace.
'Tis but a scratch